Great. Welcome everyone to this webinar on counting young children in the 2020 census, strategy and resources. I'm delighted that we have so many people interested in this webinar. If you need to give me a message, please don't use the hand raised function. Please type a message in the chat box because we're muting everybody and we're only communicating through the chat box today to protect the sound quality on the recording. So today we're going to talk to you about what we know we need to do, or what we hope we understand to do to make sure that we count all young children in the 2020 census. The Partnership for America's Children, which is the organization I run, is a network of 52 multi-issue, independent, nonpartisan, state and local child advocacy organizations. We use census data in our advocacy. Many are Kids Count grantees. And the partnership helps lead the Count All Kids initiative, along with the Coalition on Human Needs, First Focus, and 0 to 3. If you leave today with just a few things in mind, there are 4 things we really want you to understand. Well, 6 really. One is that the number of young children missed is large, growing, and the consequences are serious. The second is that we miss young children for different reasons than adults, and we need to count them differently. Third, that young children are geographically, the ones that are likely to be missed are geographically in different areas than adults. And the fourth is that families with young children need messages that persuade them to include young children when they respond to the census. It's not enough to just talk about the importance of responding to the census. And then both Rebecca and I will share specific resources with you to help you implement these strategies. So I'm not going to go into great detail about why being counted helps young children thrive. I think most of you know it. But it does mean stronger political representation, more funding for a number of key children's programs, more equitable distribution of funds even when the total amount is allocated by Congress, better planning, and better information on child well-being. Now, as I said, the undercount is large and growing, and I want to make sure you have a sense of exactly how that works. First of all, there's 2 kinds of numbers about how many children were missed. The first one is called omissions. That's every child that was missed. And we missed 2.2 million young children in 2010. Those are kids that just didn't get counted. That's 1 in 10 young children ages 0 to 4. The second number is the net undercount. So when we look at the total number of young children in the U.S. in 2010, they take the number of children that were omitted, and they subtract from them the number of kids that were double counted. So the final number for how many kids we have in this country that is about $1 million lower, 1 million children lower than it was in 2010. It's about 1 million children lower than it should have been. And we know that because we compare the number of children born, the number of children who died, and the net immigration number, which we have. So we do have a good separate data source for how many children were actually included in the census. Unfortunately, for everything below the national number, we only have net undercount numbers, but the omission numbers are probably actually worse. No matter how you look at it, we missed an enormous number of young children. That's also the biggest group that was missed by age. So if you look at this chart across the bottom, it's 5-year age groups. We missed 4.6, the net undercount was 4.6% of young children ages 0 to 4. The next biggest group was the 5 to 9-year-olds, and we missed 2.2% of them. So, no other age group even comes close to that. We also, and it will not surprise you to know, missed many more children of color, ages 0 to 4, so we missed 7.5% of Hispanic children and over 6% of black children. But notice that even the white children we missed over 2% of them. So no matter how you look at it, we missed a lot more young children, than we missed of any other group. We also miss more children in larger counties. So we start to miss kids in counties that are 20 to 50,000 people in population size. Then we miss a lot more kids in the 100 to 250,000 size. By the time you get to counties of over 500,000, we're missing almost 7.8%. It's also true that the undercount of young children has gotten steadily worse since 1980. This is not a new problem, and I will add that it is not primarily an immigration problem. It has been going on now for 40 years, and it's been getting steadily worse. If we don't change what we're doing, it's going to get even worse in 2020. So why do we miss young children? Well, one of the biggest reasons is that 2/3 of children live in complex households. Most kids are in households that got counted but got left off. So about 15% of the young children that were missed were in a household that didn't get counted at all. Another 15%, they were the only person missing in the unit. But 2/3 were missed along with other members of a household. And we know that they are more likely to be missed when the person filling out the form is not their biological or adopted parent. Complex households can be multi-generation. They can be extended families. They can be two unrelated families sharing a space. And that happens a lot when you're talking about, for example, doubled-up families, people who have housing problems. Another reason why people are missed a lot is because they have fear or confusion about whether they're supposed to report the child. We know that there's a lot of general distrust of government, much more than there was in 2010. We also know that nearly 2 million young children live in households with at least one undocumented parent. So that creates fear to begin with, and then, of course, it's worse if they add the citizenship question to the census. But even documented immigrants may be afraid of responding to the census. They're afraid of future changes to the federal policies that might put them at risk at that point. There's other reasons that have nothing to do with immigration status. One of them is that a lot of families live in crowded housing, and they're afraid that their landlord will evict them if they learn how many people are in that household. Others might be living with a grandparent in senior citizen housing where children are not allowed. And some people just don't think that the Bureau wants them to count young children, or they don't know if they do. Finally, young children also have what are called hard-to-count characteristics. It is just as these factors make it hard to count adults, they make it hard to count young children, but more young children have each of these factors. So young children have householders. The adult filling out the form is a young person. They may live in rental housing or in multi-unit structures, or they may have moved in the last year. All of those things are more likely to be true of young children and make it harder for them to get counted. So what are we doing, and what can you do to count all kids? So let's start with talking about what we believe works. We know that adults are usually missed because they don't return the form. And as a result, the Census Bureau approach to counting adults is to identify what areas that had very few adults doing self-response in 2010, to develop messaging and ads and so forth that explain why it's important to return the form and target those low response areas with those kinds of materials. But young children, 4 out of 5 times, are missed because they were left off the form from a household that responded to the census. So that means several things. First, it means that they may not be in those hard-to-count areas, and so the partnership is working with people who are developing maps showing where kids are often left off. It also means that we need messages around including children and not just about responding, and so we're conducting message research and developing outreach tools to persuade families to count children. We're doing this both at the national level and working with state and local groups. So at the national level, we have a Count All Kids committee which is a complete count committee for young children, and we're working with the Census Bureau to improve their strategies and connect them with key partners, as well as engaging national networks that work with families of young children. We also have a Count All Kids campaign that supports state and local efforts to form complete count committees, including a priority on counting young children. And once advocates have done that, we encourage them to work with those complete count committees to build plans prioritizing young children and to use our message-tested outreach materials. And finally, even apart from complete count committees, we are working with many networks that serve families with young children, such as child care providers and pediatricians, to encourage them to use those materials as well. So I mentioned earlier that young children may not be in the traditional hard-to-count areas. Dr. Bill O'Hare and PRB research found their research found relatively few children were missed in the hard-to-count areas. They did find that there are a set of factors that identify areas with a lot of kids that were missed with a high net undercount. And those factors are many children of color, many linguistically isolated households, many grandparent households, or many children who were not related to the person who filled out the form. That doesn't mean children were living without their family, but it means they and a family member are living with someone they're not related to. Interestingly, you'll notice that poverty does not show up as a high factor here, although it might do that indirectly because, for example, children who are living with a householder they're not related to might be doing that because they can't afford their own apartment. Their research is going to be available on the CUNY Hard to Count map late this summer, and we will offer a webinar and a fact sheet on it. I encourage you to watch out for those by signing up on the Count All Kids website to get our campaign materials. We also have encouraged the Census Bureau to do message research on counting young children. When they did their big study in 2018, they did 42 focus groups on hard-to-count groups, but none of those were with young children, families with young children. They did do an internet survey of 17,000 respondents, but they did not ask whether those people would count their young children. Fortunately for us, they did ask who had young children, and at our request they did an analysis showing the differences between families with young children and families without young children. So here are some of those findings. People in households that have young children are less likely than other people to say that they'll fill out the form, that they were familiar with the census, that they thought it matters a great deal, or that the most important reason for responding is civic responsibility. They also didn't really value congressional representation as an important use of the census. But they were more likely to access the internet by smartphone, and of those, a very large percentage only access the internet by smartphone. So that tells us it's important to make sure that the census website works on your smartphone, and we're working with the Bureau on that. The programs they cared most about in terms of their community getting funding are child care, schools, and job training programs. And they thought the most important reason for responding to the census was to determine funding for public services, and they were more likely to do that than households without young children. They did also care about civil rights enforcement, pride in their heritage, and contributing to a better future for their community. In those households, if they were not proficient at English, they were more likely to have concerns about confidentiality, about data sharing, and about repercussions for filling out this census. They were less likely to intend to respond to the census, and they were more likely to prefer paper over online questionnaires. So all of that tells us, one more. They also, people who had low incomes and less education and had young children were most likely to be concerned about confidentiality, data sharing, and negative repercussions, and they were even more unlikely to intend to respond to the census. So that gives us some basic information, but it left a lot of questions open. And in fact, we were not sure what they would learn when they started this because they just released their report this month. So Count All Kids Initiative has conducted some of its own message research. At this point, we've done 11 focus groups with families with young children, and we did 2 online focus groups with providers to see what would persuade providers to work with families. We're about to field an online survey, and it will have a California oversample, and we will offer a webinar on our message research on September 10th. It was originally scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern, but just today we had to move it to 1 p.m. Eastern. Once we've done all that research, we will do 2 more focus groups testing the creative materials we developed to make sure that they work. And then we're going to make outreach materials that are tested for their effectiveness with families with young children available on our website to everyone this fall, early this fall. That will include posters, flyers, fact sheets, social media tools. We're going to try and translate them into a number of languages. And we'll keep producing social media materials in particular all the way up until the census in April of 2020 and beyond, when people can still respond even though the Bureau may now be doing door-to-door head counts. So that's what we're doing. And we have some preliminary findings, and I want to make it very clear that these are preliminary. They're based on our focus groups, and we have not yet tested them in the survey. But I know a lot of you are already doing some work, and so I wanted to get you what we could already. Why are they uninterested in responding to the census? One reason is they don't understand how the data is used, and to the extent that they know it's used to allocate funding, they assume that once the data is collected, it's given to politicians, and the final funding allocation decisions are made for political reasons. They also believe that government already has the data, so they don't see any reason why they should fill out the census again or add everybody again. They have concerns about family privacy. They're very busy. They just aren't going to get to it. And as we talked about before, a number of them also are afraid of filling out the census at all or adding their children. So we tried to figure out, since so many children are left off in households that did get counted, who they'll count, who they naturally think they should count. What we saw in our focus groups, and we're definitely testing this in our survey, is that if somebody lives in the household full-time, regardless of the relationship, they say they will count them. So it might be that the grandparent fills out the form for the son and the son's girlfriend and the girlfriend's child, and they say they would count them. We are not entirely convinced by that, partly because we know young children get left off a lot, and partly because they knew that the focus group was looking at young children, so they may have felt that was the answer they're supposed to give. We tried to ask them why people might not fill out, might not include the child, and some of the answers that we got were, it's a long form, we have a lot of people, I might not get all the way through it. They also didn't understand why the government cares about counting young children. Young children are not in school, they're not paying taxes. They didn't see any reason why the government needed to know about them. There are 2 situations where they struggle with who to count or get it wrong. When people are in the household only part-time, they really are not sure what to do, and they kind of went back and forth. Generally, they got the idea that if they were there most of the time, that's who they should count, but it was clear that they were uncertain. When people are in the household and another household equal amounts of the time, what you're supposed to do according to the Bureau is see where that person was April 1st, but a lot of the people in the focus groups thought that it depended on who was claiming them as a dependent on their taxes. So they're wrong there a lot of the time. Even worse is what to do with temporary residents. Now, at least they knew they had questions about part-time residents, and they might go and look up what they should do. They are absolutely convinced they're not supposed to report temporary residents, even temporary residents who are there for months. In fact, if there is a temporary resident in your house and they do not have a permanent home, you are supposed to count them. But they are so sure they're not going to that they're not going to go look it up, which means that we who want to make sure that those people are counted need to put the message out there early and not assume that people are going to go look for the answer. What else did we learn? Well, we learned that community services were very important. That helped persuade people to fill out the census. And in our focus groups, school, child care, housing, and transportation were all important. We also learned that it was very helpful to tell them that only census data can be used for funding decisions, and that it is the decisions are made by formula and not politicians. That was very persuasive for them. And finally, language that says the effect of not being counted lasts for a decade and it's most of their childhood, that makes a big difference in persuading people it's important. So here is a very tentative message. We have not tested it online yet, but it got good responses in our focus groups. And I'm going to read it out loud. We missed over 2 million young children in the 2010 census. It's important to tell them how many so they understand it's a big problem. Federal law sets formulas based on census data to allocate over $800 billion in federal funding every year to our states and communities. When we miss young children, our state and communities lose funds for programs that children depend on, like child care, schools, Medicaid, children's health insurance, WIC, public transportation, and low-income housing. If we miss young children in the 2020 census, it would mean our state and communities get less funding for the programs that children need to thrive for a decade. That's most of their childhood. Now, obviously, this is a little wordy. I pulled it directly out of a focus group script where we'd rewritten it pretty quickly. But you get the basic themes there: the size of the problem, the fact that the funding is allocated by formula, that only this data can be used for that, and what the consequences are for kids if, in fact, they're not counted. A couple of other things I want to touch on before I turn this over to my colleague Rebecca. There are things that child advocates should really think about when you're working with complete count committees. It seems obvious to say that they need adequate that they need to be formed and they need adequate funding, but it's also important to make sure that prioritizing the count of young children is directly in their mission or their charge. If you can get a child advocacy voice on a complete count committee, that's really helpful. But if you can't, try to appear in front of them or make submissions to them to get a good strategy in front of the committee. You want to educate them about the need to have different geographic targets for kids than you have for adults. You want to educate them about our message research and our materials. One thing that may not be so obvious is that the Census Bureau has advised people to set up complete count committees with lots of subcommittees, one for business, one for education, one for government agencies, one for community agencies. They have a number. Some committees are following that advice. A lot of them aren't. The problem with that is that you then need to make sure every subcommittee understands the importance of counting young children and how to do it, because otherwise, the community groups may not know what they're supposed to do about young kids and may do, plan around adults and have a very adult-focused approach. We do have questions for you at the end of this webinar, if there's time, about the kinds of data information that we're wondering if you would find helpful in working with a complete count committee. I also want to flag for you, for child advocates, the importance of highlighting to your local school systems the census project called Statistics in Schools. The Census Bureau has created a lot of materials that can be used across a range of topics for grades preschool through 12 that are designed to educate children and their families about the importance of the census and filling out the form. And the research from 2010, when they did this program, shows that about 1 in 3 families that had school-age children saw these materials. So it's a good way to kind of reinforce the message. It's particularly important with elementary school-age kids and secondary-age school kids for 2 reasons. One is the younger children in particular may well have younger siblings at home. And the other is that in languages that are in households that are linguistically limited, where their primary language is not English, the children who are bringing these forms home may be the people the parents rely on to explain what the form is and why they need to fill it out. This program is potentially a really good way to reach families. The challenge is that the Bureau is just going to mail principals and superintendents a tube of materials in late September. And unless we educate the schools about what those materials are and why they're valuable, they may ignore them. So one of the things that you can be doing right now is reaching out to your principals and superintendents to talk about how school funding depends on counting young children and about how they're going to get these materials, and you hope they'll use them because it's a good way to get young kids counted and to make sure that their school gets more funding. I listed a wide range of outreach partners you might want to work with in your local work to engage families with young children. I want to lift up one in particular, and that's the business community, which may not be a natural fit for a lot of you, but there are a lot of young children who live in pretty isolated homes. They may be always at home with a parent, or they may only go to a family member or a neighbor for childcare. Their parents may just go to work and home. All of these other things that we're listing, they may not be in touch with. But there's one place every family with a young child goes, and that's to the store. They need to buy baby food. They need to buy diapers. They need to buy formula. Usually, they're going to buy small toys and small books. If you can engage your business community, you can help reach those families in a way that you can't with any of these other partners. So they're all important, but it's particularly important to reach out to the business community. And it's challenging this year because a lot of businesses don't want to touch it because the citizenship question is so political, even though they wouldn't be endorsing or opposing it. And so you're going to have to work directly with your local businesses that sell to families with young children to try and persuade them, that it makes sense. I have a comment right now that says they all go to the pediatrician at least once a year. Actually, not all children get their well baby care, but they may not go around the time of the census. So if they go in September, by the time the census shows up in March or April, that they may not remember that their doctor gave them information about it at all. It is important to work with everybody on the list, including pediatricians, but businesses are the one group that every single family with a young child interacts with. Our Count All Kids website makes a lot of resources available to you. We put up state and local data. We blog on key topics. We did a fiscal impact analysis of the Undercount in 2010 in 36 states. They lost a lot of money collectively over every year over the decade of between 2010 and now. States lost more than $500 million in funding for Medicaid, CHIP, foster care, adoption, and child care. So we broke out for your state how much money your state lost from it. States that are not on that list, and because of the way the funding structure works for those 5 programs, there are 13 states not on that list, lost money in other ways. But for technical reasons, those are harder to quantify. But you can use our blog to assess how much money your state lost from those programs and use that as part of your advocacy. We are developing a toolkit for outreach to families, and all of our toolkit and all of our posters and social media and so forth will be posted on our website, and we'll announce when it's available. I hope to be able to have printed copies that I can send to you, but even if I can't, you can just download from my website and print them. And we'll also start posting model materials from other states. Be creative, get people's attention. I just learned that some Minnesota councilman is running around as superhero census man, and he claims he's doing this because he was, as a child, never counted. So he vowed that no one would go uncounted. But here are some other ideas that people have used and I think have been very effective. In Kentucky, Kentucky Youth Advocates is working with the school system to do some pretty significant work around Constitution Day because the census is mandated by the Constitution. In New Jersey, a number of school students put on a presentation of a scene from Hamilton and saying about how they were not throwing away their shot at getting counted. I also want to flag for you that there is a nonprofit publisher called named Simply Put that is putting out a board book for babies about counting the family. I've seen an early version, and I've had the Census Bureau review it, and that might be a useful tool for you. I think you may have to buy them in batches of 5,000, but we're trying to figure out how to make it available with people getting together for buying it or whatever. But just be creative, get people's attention. To access all of these things, just go to our website and sign up for the campaign materials, and that's when you'll learn about the updated Hearts account map, our messaging webinar, our creative materials, and our social media campaign. So that's what you can use and the strategy that we recommend at Count All Kids. But we are not the only organization working on making sure that we count all children. We're very fortunate that Rebecca Rodriguez is with us today to talk about how NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, is working to help support the count of young children as well. Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Rebecca. I have the honor of being the Deputy Director of Census Programs, working to make sure all those little guys, the young children, get counted. And so many of you are familiar with our organization, and we really focus on ensuring that the undercount gap is eliminated. We have three strategies that we use in terms of how we go about ensuring that Latino families receive the supports necessary. And so we are organized in a methodical method to support Latino and immigrant families by having one of the major strategies be political research and advocacy. We also have the constituency services portion where we support newly elected and ongoing officials and provide information, training, and support to help them understand and know some of the issues with immigrant families and how they can support those families in the communities that they serve. And our third component is the civic engagement. And within that strategy, we have a path to citizenship where we provide tools and resources. We also have a voter registration and access to information piece within the civic engagement strategy. And then most importantly, the census information and tools to ensure that everyone gets counted, especially those little guys. We also want to make sure that we are promoting a complete and accurate census in terms of our central mission, NALEO Educational Fund. We want to make sure that everyone gets counted, and especially the little guys. And so our role is to serve and support as a Census Bureau's national partner, because we are located nationally in other states, and we have a pretty robust presence in other states. We also function as a Census Bureau supporter. We share the different resources that are available through the Census Bureau to provide support to all of the families being served. And lastly, we function as a census watchdog to make sure that all of the resources are accurate and accessible for our families. And so the census accuracy has been lacking. While the count has improved over time, as Deb mentioned, certain populations are undercounted, including African Americans, Latinos, American Indians. And like Deb, our research has also shown that households with low incomes may not necessarily feel confident to report who is living in their household, and that includes leaving out the children because of fear. There's also immigrants and individuals with low English language proficiency that can be a barrier for families to respond to the census. There are mixed households where you have multiple families, multi-generational families that are renting rooms or different spaces like garages There are also residents who live in non-traditional housing. You may find whole families living in a garage or sharing a home. There's also the issue of rural residents, and there are residents that are constantly on the move, be it because they are farm workers or because of the work situation. And of course, the bottom line is that very young children, ages 0 to 4, are being left out. And what we found in our research, as Deb mentioned, we also found that in many of the households that there was a response on the census questionnaire. For whatever reason, they were leaving out the little guys, either because of shared custody issues or other issues. And so we want to make sure that we share with everyone, with all the parents, especially the importance of counting those little ones. So young children are most likely to be excluded from the census, and really the actual missed number can be translated to 2.2 million, but you have to make sure to take out those households that had been double counted for a net undercount of 1 million children. But really, the families of colors, the families of the lower socioeconomic realm were the ones that were most likely to not count those little ones, creating a net undercount of around 7% for young Latino children and around a 6.3% for African American families. And so the undercount of every young child, including Latino children, is really concentrated in some specific states. Here, we wanted to share sort of the net undercount in some of the top 6 states, and looking at the undercount in percentage, we may think, oh, well, you know, it may not seem as bad, but when you look at the actual amount in federal funds that the city is missing out on, then it becomes a more important and larger issue. That is a lot of money, and that really represents a lot of programs that will directly impact children, like Deb said, for the next 10 years. So we want to be cognizant and be able to share this information, we believe, not only with the parents and the households, but with the educators as well. They should be aware of the issue. In our research, we found that there were some key folks that were the best sources for disseminating census information, and these trusted folks would be educators and teachers. So in addition to friends and relatives being the most trusted sources for disseminating census information, our research led us to the information that teachers and educators are some of the most trusted messengers. And so we have created resource materials that will enable those trusted messengers to share the importance of being counted. And again, we want to make sure that they understand the connection between the census total numbers that will generate the funding for the services that they most care about, things like the child care, schools, and a better community. So we've developed template presentations for the various stakeholders. We have a presentation specifically targeted for superintendents and administrators that really provides a more global picture for all of the administrators at the specific districts. We've also have a template for districts that want to commit to ensuring that the undercount gap is eliminated, and we have resolution templates that they can download and have access to bring forth to their boards for election of ensuring the undercount is eliminated. We also have created presentations specifically targeted for teachers, child care providers, TAs, and site administrators, where we connect the importance of the accurate count of children to funding and provide examples of how those funds impact their school, things like Title I funds, things like Head Start funding, things like funding for special education services and the like. In addition to those two stakeholder groups and presentations, we've also created presentations for parents, parent leaders, and leaders that are both advisory parents and decision-making parents, because as you know, at the school site, you have different parent councils, different parent groups. Some of those groups are decision-making councils, and some are advisory. So we want all parents, everyone, to get and have access to comprehensible information that really connects how counting a child translates into the school's budget. And like Deb mentioned, we also find that in immigrant communities, usually the eldest child becomes the translator, becomes the official sort of advocate, helping the family navigate this sometimes complex system. And so we've also created a more visual presentation that can be shared with middle school and high school students, so that they can be the active advocate in the home to remind whomever is filling out the census questionnaire to be sure to count the little one in their total count. We worked with different families, different groups, and in some cases, as we engaged in doing a mock census activity, in one particular case, we started off with 5 folks in the home, and by the time we explored folks that were renting, extended family, people living in the garage, we ended up with 11 folks in the home. So again, we've created activities where they are able to do mock census counts and help families understand how important it is to count all the little guys. We've also put together a form that suggests different ideas on how to include and involve your stakeholder. Everything from at a community level, having a booth and information at community events, to providing this information during monthly assemblies that may be taking place at the elementary, middle, or high school, and also to make connections with families at home by providing activities that incorporate the process of counting everyone in the household, so that as we build literacy, as we build math skills, we're also reinforcing the importance of counting all those little guys and getting them ready to be successful for the next 10 years. And we also have key census dates that we share with our stakeholder groups where we highlight key dates, and we make sure that we sort of reiterate the importance of getting counted and to make sure that they are counted April 1st. And so in addition to the dates, we also offer them ways to get involved. And one of our latest tools is, has been structured around the court decision that we are all waiting for. And we really are making sure that regardless of that decision, of course we don't want the question included, because that of course is going to foster and increase fear for our Latino parents and immigrant parents. Regardless of the decision, we are really asking our folks to make sure that everyone is counted and everyone responds so that we have accurate numbers, funding, and support services moving forward. And so in the ways to get involved, there are different resources that you can access that will benefit and help you with making sure that those little ones get counted. I'm going to turn it over to Deb at this point.
Great, thank you. So we have a bunch of questions, and one of them was from Cyrus, and he asked, can we shed some light on the timeline of the census? For example, when are the questionnaires mailed out, when are they due, and what precipitates a census worker to come to your home? So I'm going to take a quick crack at this, but Rebecca, you may want to add to it. First of all, this is the first census where you may not get the actual questionnaire initially. Starting in early to mid-March, I forget exactly when, the Census Bureau will mail out materials to homes that invite them to fill out the census online, and also explain that they've got the option of calling up a census phone center and answering the census online, and they can actually do that in 12 different languages. Or if they want to wait, they will eventually get a questionnaire. So those are kind of your three initial choices. They're really hoping most people will do it online, but you can call a phone center to fill it out. Or if you wait and haven't responded to their invitation to do it online or on the phone, you'll get a paper one. The official census day is April 1st, and that's the day they want you to refer to when you figure out who is living in your home. But you can keep mailing them back in afterwards or going online and filling it out afterwards. And then starting in like the second week of May, I think, they start their non-response follow-up process, and that's when people actually come to your home and knock on the door if you haven't filled it out. But even then, you can go online or you can call or you can mail back a form you got, and if you do that, then they'll take you off the non-response list. And the census itself kind of wraps up. It's a little unclear. It partly depends how they're doing, I think, but sometime around July. Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, and then we want to also support families. We will have a live call center in January where folks can call any questions, and as they get ready to respond to the census questionnaire, they can certainly call us, and we'll be happy to walk them through and help them in answering their questions as they're filling out their form as well. And we are, going to be trying to get materials out to people well in advance of March. Our next question is from Sheeling Rawlings Fine, and she asks, will there be materials in Chinese focusing on young children? We certainly hope to have at least our basic materials translated into Chinese. The Census Funder Group has funded a number of hubs, and so AAJC, the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, is the national hub on Asian Americans.
So you can also go to their website and access lots of materials in Chinese in general and in other Asian languages. We have asked them to help us make sure that we can get our materials translated and produced in Chinese for people. To some extent, how many languages we can get translated into is going to be a funding issue and, frankly, a timing matter as well. But we certainly do hope to do it in Chinese, and I'm hoping to do it in a whole number of languages. Our top priority has to be Spanish because so many people speak Spanish. But, ideally we would get it up in a wide number of languages. The board book that I mentioned that's being produced by Simply Put, I think they're trying to do it in at least 10 languages also. Our next question is from Amy Swan, and she asked if I can talk a little more about the information that will be put on the CUNY Hard to Count map site. Amy, I actually do not know as much as I would like to about it, and I think that's in part because Bill and PRB are still trying to figure out, exactly what data they've got. My impression is that it will be all census tracts, but do not hold me to that. What I can tell you is that late this summer, we will do a webinar that walks you through in detail how to use the new data that's up on the Hard to Count map, and Bill O'Hare will be writing a fact sheet for us on that as well. I really don't think it'll be just the 261 counties. We have undercount data for over 500 large counties, so I would expect us to have more than that. But I hesitate to be too definitive because I'm not entirely sure they know, and I certainly don't know. Cyrus asked where you can access the materials we've been referring to, and the two biggest places, of course, are the two on this list of resources, Count All Kids and Hágase Contar. We encourage you to check them both out, and I very much encourage you to go on to Count All Kids and sign up for the list of that sends out all of our resources as they become available. I should add that I just got a note from the people who are producing that board book, and they say it will be in Chinese, and there is programming and training and event strategy for communities to use it. So I also have a question here from, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Yaira Bene Utzkategi, I apologize if I'm not, asking about multiple families in one household. Does each family need to be counted? When you get a mailing from the census, it has a unique identifier on it. Everybody in that household, no matter how many families it is, are supposed to be counted at once using that unique identifier. And you will not get two mailings. We think this is a big part of why we miss families, is because they assume that the person filling out the form assumes that they are only supposed to answer it for them and their family, and they don't realize that other families also living in the same home will just never get a form and never get counted. So yes, if it's a bunch of families in a household, or a bunch of millennials, right, 6 young adults sharing a home, they all need to get counted in one form. Now, having said that, we know that will not always happen. And so we have been working with the Census Bureau to make sure that there is a way that you can get counted even if somebody filled out the form and didn't include you. And that should happen. And we are working with the Bureau to produce a fact sheet that explains exactly how much, how to do it. I believe that the best way to do it is there's a way to fill out the census where you don't need your identifier, but you should then include as much information as you can about everybody in the household, and the census computer system will match that with the form for the same address and try and just eliminate the duplicates. Rebecca, can you answer the next question from Ashley?
Sure. The next question comes from Ashley, and in anticipation of the citizenship question, what is NALEO's strategy in advising community members as they fill out the form? So our advice is to fill it out, fill it out, fill it out. Are we encouraging all folks to leave that question blank? At this point, we're not. We're asking them to fill out the questionnaire we're not telling them to not do something or to do something. We're just, again, reiterating the importance of them submitting the information, because at this point we don't have a clear answer from the Census Department in terms of what are the consequences for leaving one question not filled in. So we are just asking families to fill out the form. At this point, we're not addressing, what if scenarios, because we are still waiting for, hopefully, the decision will be that they will not be including the question. And so we're looking to Wednesday to see what the answer will be, and then based on that, we'll determine what the strategy will be. We want to be clear that we are encouraging our families to make sure that they respond, because we want their voice to be heard and counted.
Thank you. I want to go back to the board book. We've had a couple of questions about that. One is what the cost of the board book is. I haven't seen the most recent calculations, but it's a couple of dollars a board book, but you have to buy them in quantity. At least that was true the last time I looked at it. You can get information about the board book at a website, wecountkids.org. So I encourage you to go there and to learn about it. Part of the reason it is as inexpensive as it is that a foundation has funded the full development of the book, and they are working very hard to keep it entirely affordable. But go to wecountkids.org and see what the price is, and I'm sure they'll be putting up more information as well as they get a little closer to publication, although I think that's pretty soon actually. We also have a question here about families living in RVs. I'm not exactly sure what that question is. Families in RVs should be counted. I guess that kind of goes without saying. If you have, a regular mail delivery, you should also then be able to get the forms that you need. If you only have a mailbox, the way that you get counted is by census people, actually going out and looking to see where people are. Hopefully you're on the list and get counted. But if people are not sure if they're going to get counted, as I said, they don't have to wait to be approached by the census. They can go online and fill out the census online without that unique numerator. There's been a series of webinars on census operations, and I can go back and look and see if it says more specific things about RVs, but that's my understanding. And we did a census operations and young children. We're putting a fact sheet together based on it that the census will review, and I'll make sure we include RVs in that and get the Census Bureau to be exact about it. We have another question from Jennifer Clark, and I think this will be our last one today because it's after 5. We have done a local survey of trusted messengers such as pediatricians, home visitors, preschoolers, and many of them are quite anti-census and are not willing to even answer their clients' questions about the census. How can we build trust and willingness among the trusted messengers? It's a really good question, and it's a big problem. I'm assuming that they are anti-census because they are worried about people's safety and the data being shared. Obviously, the results of the Supreme Court decision on whether to include the citizenship question may affect that. We did a couple of focus groups with providers, and they had a lot of very good questions, and so we are putting together a fact sheet designed for providers to answer their questions. I would really love to see your survey if you can send it to me and see if it identifies other questions that people had or concerns that they had, so we can get the focus group to use that and the focus group to design our fact sheet and make sure it's helpful to get service providers to do it. We've also been doing a lot of work at the national level with networks of pediatricians and so forth, to try and educate them from the top down about why it will make a difference to their families. I think it's really important for people to understand that the resources that let them serve these families are based on census data, because I think probably a lot of the service providers don't understand that. And so we are trying to develop tools that will let you educate those service providers, but it's a problem. I think we all know that this is a terrifying environment to be an immigrant in, documented or not, and it's understandable that providers will be hesitant about the census. I will say one more thing about a message there, and that is immigrants who are documented are not giving the Census Bureau new information. It's information that INS already has. Immigrants who are not documented but are already in the immigration process, it's not new information. INS already has it. So the only people who are even thinking about giving information that INS doesn't have would be the people who are undocumented and not known to the system. And a lot of those people file their taxes, and they have an ITIN number. And so they're already giving the federal government information about their presence in this country. We think that, this is not more dangerous than that. We think if they're comfortable doing that, they should be comfortable filling out the census. I'm going to try something really quickly, which is that, as I said, we had a couple of questions for you all, and I'm hoping that you will fill them out quickly, and then we'll close out the webinar. Here it is. So if you could just take a minute and tell us which of these different kinds of data would be useful for you, I would really appreciate it. I had a hard time squeezing it in. So it's state data on the net undercount of young children, data on the net undercount of young children in the 587 largest counties, state data on young children's relationship to the householder. Just kind of go down and click off everything that would be helpful to you, and that will help us decide what to present. And you can pick as many as you think would be useful in your work. So while they're doing that, Rebecca, do you have any final thoughts?
Just to be mindful and to make sure that we are able to clearly sort of share the connections with educators. Teachers in particular are always very focused and entrenched in making sure that the quality of instruction that they are delivering is the best for children. So by us providing the connection in terms of the importance of the census and how it impacts their school, and most importantly their classroom, really supports this teacher or educator being a trusted messenger to be able to then feel confident to share with their parents why they should respond. And so we're hoping that through the resources that Deb and I mentioned, we're able to really eliminate the undercount of the little guys. So we really appreciate everyone's hard work and effort and support and feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Please feel free to email us with any questions. If you want to send them all to census@countallkids.org, I'll make sure appropriate ones get sent on to Rebecca. And I will also add that we are testing some of the messages around the citizenship question in the online survey that I mentioned that we're going to be conducting soon. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you responding to the survey. We're excited to be a resource to you and to see how excited people are about this issue. Have a great day, and please reach out to us if we can be helpful in any way. I'm going to stop our recording now.
Bye-bye.